Agrippina and Nero shared more than blood. They shared a toxic legacy of manipulation and madness. While the empress pulled strings behind the throne, Nero spiraled into violent madness, his paranoia fed by a mother who controlled him with secrets and threats. Their relationship was marked by jealousy, betrayal, and brutal power plays, where love twisted into a lethal weapon. Nero's lovers were tortured or disappeared. Agrippina's spies infiltrated every corner of the palace. This deadly dance culminated in betrayal so dark it ended with murder in the dead of night, forever changing the fate of the Roman Empire. She was not born to be ordinary, and from her very first steps inside the cold, marble walls of the Roman Empire, Agrippina the Younger learned that survival meant power, and power came from blood, fear, and betrayal. She wasn't like other women in Rome. While others played their roles as dutiful wives or silent mothers, Agrippina sharpened her mind like a blade and watched, always watched. She was the daughter of Germanicus, sister of Emperor Caligula, niece and later wife of Emperor Claudius, and mother to one of the most feared emperors in history, Nero. But before any of that, she was a child in a palace full of whispers and knives. Rome was crumbling from within, rotting behind its golden statues and triumphal arches, and young Agrippina grew up understanding that loyalty was a mask and love was currency. Her family was cursed, people said, the bloodline of the Julio Claudians tainted by madness and ambition, but to Agrippina, the curse was just a challenge to overcome. She studied her enemies, and she studied her allies even harder. Her eyes never stopped moving. As her brother Caligula rose to power, Agrippina watched Rome become a playground of cruelty. The city's laughter turned to silence as nobles were murdered for amusement, and the Senate became nothing more than actors on a bloody stage. Caligula, the mad emperor who believed himself a god, trusted no one, not even his own sisters. Agrippina, once his favorite, was exiled to a desolate island, accused of conspiracy, stripped of her titles, her wealth, and nearly her life. But she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She waited. Because she knew something others didn't. Rome always forgot its exiles, but never expected their return. Years passed, and emperors fell. Claudius, the uncle she once mocked, now sat on the throne, chosen for his weakness, not his strength. But Agrippina saw opportunity in that weakness. She returned to Rome not as a broken woman, but as a ghost wrapped in velvet and poison. Her first husband was dead, her second disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and her third, Claudius, would soon be her husband too. A niece marrying her uncle horrified the people. But Agrippina didn't care. Rome's morals were its own joke. She married Claudius not for love, but for the throne. She smiled in public, kissed his hand, and played the obedient empress. But behind the curtains, she pulled the strings of the empire. She silenced rivals with forced suicides and exiles, poisoned those who questioned her authority, and seduced the Senate with charm and terror. She placed her son Nero in front of the people as Rome's bright future, and ensured that Claudius' own son, Britannicus, was slowly erased from memory. She wrapped herself in mourning when people died, but she always benefited when they did. Her court became a nest of whispers, filled with astrologers, poisoners, and spies. Nothing happened in Rome without Agrippina's approval, or her wrath. She used fear the way an artist uses paint, and her masterpiece was almost complete. Her eyes burned with ambition, and those who looked into them saw their own destruction. Claudius, blind to her schemes at first, slowly began to see the danger, but by then it was too late. His food no longer tasted right. His servants were replaced. He was a man surrounded by shadows, and Agrippina was the darkest of them all. As Rome slept, she plotted. As Rome prayed, she laughed. She had tasted power, and she would not let it go. And so began the reign of a woman who ruled from behind a curtain of silken blood, who wore grief like a costume, and who could smile while she ordered a death. Rome had no idea what was coming, but Agrippina did, because to her, power wasn't just something to hold, it was something to become. She was no longer a niece, or a wife, or even a mother. She was Rome's silent empress, and her reign had just begun. By the time Agrippina secured her place beside Emperor Claudius, the imperial palace had become a web, and she was the spider spinning in its center. Behind every laugh shared at court, behind every smile at public games, there was fear. She had transformed from a disgraced exile into Rome's most powerful woman, and she wore that power like a second skin. But her rise was not built on charm alone. It was built on corpses. Her first husband, Aeneas Domitius Ahenobarbus, had died conveniently, just as her ambitions were beginning to take form. Her second, Passienus Crispus, left her with wealth after a sudden and suspicious death. And now Claudius, her uncle, her emperor, her puppet. He stood one step away from becoming yet another sacrifice to her son's future. Nero, her boy with the sharp eyes and the sharper tongue, was being groomed not just as a prince, but as a god. Agrippina placed tutors around him like soldiers. The philosopher Seneca taught him words of wisdom, while soldiers taught him how to command men. She bathed him in poetry and steel, preparing him to be adored and feared. Britannicus, Claudius's rightful son, still lived, but not for long. Agrippina whispered poison into Claudius' ears, turning him against his own blood, convincing him to adopt Nero, to declare him heir, to cast aside Britannicus like a broken toy. Claudius agreed, not realizing he was signing his own death warrant. The moment Nero became heir, Claudius became a loose end. Agrippina knew the clock had begun to tick. She increased the dosage of his medicines. Meals were prepared only by her trusted servants. On the night of his final banquet, Claudius bit into a dish of mushrooms, his favorite, and within hours he began to convulse. His voice vanished, his body trembled, and Agrippina, dressed in mourning black before he had even died, refused to let anyone near him. No doctors, no friends, no family, only silence and one whispering voice. Hers. When dawn came, Claudius was dead, and Rome was told he had simply passed peacefully in his sleep. Agrippina wept before the public, spoke words of loss, and then placed the imperial diadem upon Nero's head before the body was even cold. The people cheered, the Senate obeyed, and the Praetorian Guard bent the knee. Nero was 16, beautiful, charismatic, and easily controlled, for now. But behind him stood Agrippina, eyes blazing, mouth silent, running the empire with a grip of iron. She sat in Senate meetings behind a veil, her presence unspoken but impossible to ignore. Coins were minted with her image beside Nero's, something no woman had dared before. She received embassies, dictated laws, and ordered executions. Her enemies began to vanish. Those who whispered of Claudius's strange death met quiet ends. She walked the palace halls with a calm coldness, her robes sweeping over stones still stained by her ambition. But absolute power is a dangerous drug. As Nero grew older, he began to pull away. The boy she had crafted like a sculpture began to crack. He found lovers she disapproved of, made decisions without her consent, and began to dream of ruling alone. Agrippina tightened her grip. She dismissed those who grew too close to him, placed spies among his guards, and even slapped him in front of his advisors. The empress who had ruled through her son now found herself battling him for control. Nero, still young but already tasting the venom of power, began to resent her. The palace became a battlefield of whispers. Mother and son, once united in ambition, now circled each other like predators. But Agrippina would not give up what she had killed to gain. She reminded him daily that he owed everything to her, that his crown was purchased with her hands, her blood, her sacrifice. But Nero no longer wanted to hear it. The boy who had once looked at her with awe now looked at her with fear, and slowly the empire began to feel the tension. The Senate watched in silence. The people whispered behind doors, and Agrippina, once untouchable, began to sense the ground shifting beneath her feet. But she was not finished. Not yet. If Nero thought he could push her aside, he had forgotten who she was. She had survived exile, assassinated emperors, and bent the empire to her will. She had killed for him, bled for him, and now she would fight him if she had to. The palace glowed with golden torches at night, but the air was colder than ever. Every room held secrets. Every guard held a knife. And Agrippina, the woman who had once whispered Rome's fate into the ears of emperors, now faced a new enemy, her own son. The battle for the empire was not over. It was only just beginning. By now, Rome had begun to whisper not just about Agrippina's power, but about the things power couldn't explain. Doors that creaked open in the dead of night. Visitors arriving to her chambers without guards. Men leaving with trembling hands and haunted eyes. Beneath her regal gowns and motherly titles, Agrippina had become something else. Something more dangerous than a scheming empress or a grieving widow. She was Rome's most seductive threat, a woman who didn't just outthink her enemies. She owned them. And if fear didn't work, she used pleasure like poison. There were rumors, so many that even the Senate stopped pretending they weren't true, of secret meetings with generals under moonlight, of young tribunes invited into her bed to whisper the secrets of the legions, of senators whose loyalty changed overnight after a single encounter behind silk curtains. Agrippina understood what Rome worshipped: power, blood, and beauty. She used all three. But it was her relationship with Nero that made Rome uneasy. She had raised him like a god, but sometimes the line between devotion and domination blurred. She would dress him in robes she chose, whisper into his ear before he spoke in public, and hold his face in her hands too long, too intimately for a mother. One night, a maidservant claimed to have seen them lying beside each other on a couch, too close, too still, too quiet. Another servant vanished after overhearing something in the imperial bath. No one ever found her body. When Nero took a lover, Acte, a freedwoman with soft eyes and a gentle voice, Agrippina flew into a rage. Not because of jealousy, she said, but because Acte was beneath him. But she didn't scream like a jealous mother. She moved like a betrayed queen. She ordered Acte's home searched, her friends interrogated, her food poisoned. When that failed, she whispered to Nero that Acte was spying for enemies of the empire. But he didn't listen. And Agrippina, she didn't forget. At court, she began to play dirtier. She staged humiliations for those who opposed her, exposed private letters, forged confessions, revealed affairs between senators and slaves. She even arranged for wives to be caught cheating, then offered the husbands protection in exchange for votes. And when the wives begged for mercy, she made them crawl before her. But she didn't always show mercy. Some of those women ended up in the Tiber, floating face down in the morning fog. Others were never seen again. She had files on everyone: love affairs, bribes, letters meant to be burned. She knew who paid for what, who slept with whom, who hated whom. She fed this information to Nero when it suited her, making him see betrayal in every shadow. And when he grew paranoid, she reminded him he could trust only one person: her. But Nero was no longer the boy she could dress like a doll. He began slipping away, entertaining new advisors, meeting with actors and charioteers, spending more time in brothels than in council chambers. Agrippina responded by staging her own return to glory. She wore transparent gowns to public events, draped herself in diamonds that had once belonged to Claudius' wives, and stood directly behind Nero at official ceremonies. So close the people wondered who ruled whom. She reminted coins with both their faces, made sacrifices to herself at temples, and greeted foreign diplomats as if she were the emperor. Rome looked at her and didn't see a grieving widow or a guiding mother. They saw a shadow ruler, a puppet master, a woman who had tasted blood and couldn't stop. Some claimed she held secret rituals in the palace crypts, inviting only the most desperate senators and generals. The floor was said to be stained with wine, or something darker. There were games played with masks, with knives, with oaths whispered under candlelight. Those who left either rose quickly in rank or vanished entirely. Agrippina, it was whispered, had revived something older than Rome, an ancient cult of control, one where loyalty was bought not with gold, but with secrets and flesh. And then there were the dancers, dozens of them trained in Egypt and the East, brought to the palace at her command. They were beautiful, silent, and loyal only to her. When enemies resisted blackmail or threats, she sent dancers to them, cloaked in perfume and silk, and within days those same enemies came crawling back, afraid, ashamed, obedient. She didn't just conquer her foes, she undressed them. She made them need her. But her most disturbing power remained over Nero. He had once adored her, now he feared her. She would enter his room at night unannounced, inspect his sheets, demand to see the letters he wrote. Once, when he slapped her hand away, she ordered his favorite tutor beaten with rods in the courtyard. She screamed, "I made you and I can unmake you," loud enough for the entire palace to hear. And when Nero tried to send her away to a separate villa, she turned the Roman mob against him. Suddenly, crowds flooded the streets, shouting her name. Senators received anonymous notes revealing their bribes. Temples mysteriously caught fire. Riots began. Nero backed down. Agrippina had taught him fear once again. But something had changed. The mother who once ruled with whispers now ruled with chains. Her grip was tightening, her paranoia growing. She trusted no one. Servants were beaten for glancing at her food too long. Advisors were fired without reason. She held dinner parties where no one ate, just listened, terrified of saying the wrong word. And Nero, he sat beside her, silent, smiling like a prisoner who hadn't yet found the key. The palace glowed with candlelight, but shadows filled every corner. Her footsteps echoed through marble halls like thunder. Agrippina had become more than a mother, more than a widow, more than an empress. She was the ghost Rome had summoned and couldn't exorcise. Not yet. Court Agrippina's rise was paved with secrets so dark that even the shadows refused to whisper them aloud. The people of Rome saw only the empress in silk robes, commanding armies and emperors alike. But behind closed doors in rooms hidden deep within the palace, a different story played out. One of poison, betrayal, and forbidden desire that would have shattered the empire had it been exposed. She was a woman who used her body as a weapon, but her true power came from something far more insidious: the art of control through fear and manipulation. The court whispered that Agrippina had lovers whose names were never spoken, powerful men who bent knee, not for love, but for the twisted promises of power she dangled like a cruel game. These were senators with wives and children, generals loyal to the empire, yet each was caught in her web, seduced, threatened, or blackmailed. One such secret lover was a young senator named Lucius, whose star rose swiftly before he mysteriously vanished without a trace. Some said Agrippina had grown bored and discarded him like a broken doll. Others whispered darker tales, that he was found drowned in the Tiber, a silenced witness to secrets too dangerous to share. But her influence did not stop at men. Agrippina's court was alive with forbidden affairs between women, whispered in the night, hidden behind veils and faint smiles. She herself was rumored to engage in scandalous liaisons with her handmaidens and trusted attendants, women who served her not just in duty, but in the sharing of dark pleasures. These relationships were never spoken of openly, but they fueled her legend as a woman who played by her own rules, beyond the laws of men or gods. The emperor's own household was a hotbed of lust and treachery. Claudius' former wives and concubines eyed Agrippina with suspicion and hatred, but none dared challenge her openly. Many met tragic ends, falling ill suddenly, disappearing from public view, or poisoned in the dead of night. Her servants carried out her will silently, delivering cups laced with death and letters that sealed fates without a trial. But the darkest secret was the fate of her stepson, Britannicus. While Rome celebrated Nero's rise, Britannicus lived in the shadows, a reminder of a claim to the throne that Agrippina refused to acknowledge. The young prince was said to have been watched constantly, guards stationed outside his chambers, spies listening to every word. Rumors spread that Agrippina plotted to eliminate him quietly, through poison or forced exile, but the court was careful to hide these acts from public eyes. Britannicus's death, when it finally came years later, was said to be swift and surrounded by mystery, but not a drop of suspicion was allowed to touch Agrippina's name. And then there was the matter of Claudius' death itself, a death that never sat right with Rome's senators or the people. While officially he had succumbed to an illness, the palace knew better. The mushrooms that ended his life had been prepared under Agrippina's orders, served by her most trusted cook, who vanished soon after. The poison was slow and merciless, draining the emperor of strength as Agrippina smiled behind closed doors, already planning the empire's future with Nero as her puppet. Yet power came with paranoia. No one was safe in her presence, not even her closest allies. Her old friend and advisor, the philosopher Seneca, found himself trapped between admiration and horror, his words carefully chosen lest they anger the empress who had eyes everywhere. Court officials who dared question her decisions found their careers destroyed overnight or were accused of treason with no evidence except her word. Some were beaten publicly, their families disgraced to send a warning. Her secret police grew with every passing month, men and women who whispered in every corner, stole letters, and broke into homes. Rome was no longer a city of senators and soldiers. It had become a city of spies and victims. The empire itself began to feel the weight of her influence. Laws changed overnight to favor her allies. Rich landowners received tax breaks while the poor starved. Grain shipments were diverted to those who supported her, leaving entire districts hungry and desperate. But the darkest consequence was how she twisted Nero's mind. Her whispered lies fed his fears, turning him against friends and mentors. She told him of plots to kill him, of enemies disguised as loyal servants. She taught him to trust no one but her. The boy who had once smiled brightly was now a man shadowed by doubt and rage. Their relationship, once close, was now a battle for control. Some nights, Nero would scream in his chambers, and the palace would shake with his fury. Other times, he would retreat into silence, his eyes glazed, haunted by dreams his mother planted like seeds of poison. Meanwhile, Agrippina's hold on the court tightened. She threw lavish banquets where senators drank deep and danced with the dancers she had imported from distant lands. Women who intoxicated not just with perfume but with dark secrets. It was said that many deals made under those moonlit nights were sealed with whispered threats or whispered lies. No one knew which. When rivals tried to rise, they found themselves accused of the most humiliating scandals: adultery, sacrilege, or plotting against the emperor. Some were forced to commit suicide to save their families, their names erased from records. Agrippina was merciless. She had learned long ago that kindness was weakness and mercy was death. And yet, amid the cruelty, she maintained a veneer of grace. To the people, she was the protective mother of Rome, the guardian of the empire's future. To the Senate, she was a force they had no choice but to respect or fear. But the truth was far darker. Agrippina was a woman who ruled through death, who turned love into chains, and who made the empire itself a prison for those who dared oppose her. The golden halls echoed with cries never heard by the public. The empire's heart beat to the rhythm of her will, and it was a rhythm of poison, lies, and unrelenting ambition. Rome's most dangerous empress was not yet done. Her greatest game was still to come. In the gilded halls of the imperial palace, where marble gleamed and statues watched silently, Agrippina's dark reign deepened. The empress was no longer content to rule merely through manipulation and fear. She had become a force of raw, unchecked desire and cruel calculation. Rumors churned like a poison mist throughout Rome, whispers of secrets so vile that even the bravest senators lowered their voices when speaking of her. It was said that Agrippina's bed was a throne of power in itself, a place where alliances were forged and destroyed, where the line between pleasure and pain blurred beyond recognition. Those who sought her favor had to pay a price, and that price was often a piece of their own soul. Many men and women alike found themselves entwined in affairs with the empress, some born of lust, others of necessity, but all tangled in her web of control. Among her lovers were powerful generals who once commanded legions, now reduced to trembling servants begging for her smile. One such man, Gaius Cassius, was rumored to have been her secret consort for years, a union shrouded in mystery and scandal. He disappeared one foggy morning, his body never found, though the scent of poison lingered in the corridors. Yet the darkest tales were reserved for those who dared refuse her. Women who crossed Agrippina found themselves trapped in a nightmare of betrayal. Some were accused of sorcery and subjected to horrific tortures in the depths of the palace dungeons. Others vanished during midnight processions along the Tiber, their screams swallowed by the river's cold embrace. The empress seemed to delight in watching her enemies crumble, not with swords or daggers, but through secrets whispered into the wrong ears or letters forged with deadly intent. At the heart of these twisted games was her son, Nero, whose own moral compass had been warped under her relentless influence. Their relationship, once filled with tenderness and hope, had darkened into a dangerous dance of domination and rebellion. It was said that Agrippina introduced Nero to pleasures that shattered his innocence. Lavish orgies where senators lost themselves in wine and lust, courtesans who whispered conspiracies between gasps, and secret rooms where the boundaries of decency were shattered. These scenes were not mere decadence, but calculated moves in a deadly game. Agrippina wielded her son's appetites like a weapon, encouraging his cruelty and vanity, while quietly tightening her grip on his throne. But the empress's reach extended beyond her immediate circle. The palace was rife with spies, her agents planted in every corner of Rome, from the forums to the baths, from the markets to the Senate chambers. They collected whispers and rumors, secrets and lies, weaving a web that stretched across the empire. Those who thought themselves safe soon found their darkest moments exposed to the light, their reputations shredded by carefully planted stories. It was said that Agrippina maintained a ledger, a dreadful book cataloging every betrayal and weakness of Rome's elite. This book was her arsenal, her insurance policy against any who might challenge her. The more she gained, the more ruthless she became. Even the Vestal Virgins, sacred symbols of Rome's purity, were not spared from scandal. Some whispered that Agrippina arranged secret meetings between the Vestals and men of power, shattering sacred vows for political gain. Others claimed she orchestrated disappearances and forced abortions to cover illicit pregnancies that could unravel her carefully constructed empire. The empress's cruelty was matched only by her cunning. She set traps that ensnared even those closest to her. Trusted advisors found themselves accused of treason or corruption overnight, their families disgraced and destroyed. Senators who dared oppose her policies found their homes burned or their slaves sold off in chains. The city's streets grew darker under her rule, fear replacing hope in the hearts of citizens. Yet Agrippina maintained her facade of piety and grace, appearing in public as the devoted mother and protector of Rome. Her eyes held the fire of a queen who had paid a terrible price and would see her enemies crushed beneath her feet. But behind those eyes lurked a monster, the mother who would poison her own blood if it secured her throne, the woman who bathed in the tears of the innocent and thrived on the ruin of others. Nero himself was caught in her shadow, a puppet tangled in her strings. His violent outbursts and cruel whims were whispered to be reflections of the darkness she nurtured within him. She had turned her son into a weapon, a reflection of her own twisted soul. Rome was a city on edge, its future uncertain beneath the weight of Agrippina's reign. The empress ruled through lust, lies, and death, a queen crowned not by the gods but by fear. And as her enemies fell one by one into ruin or the cold river, one thing was clear. Agrippina's thirst for power was far from quenched. The blood on her hands would only grow darker. By now, Agrippina's empire was no longer built on whispers alone. It was drenched in blood, lust, and betrayal so thick it poisoned the very air of Rome. The palace had become a sinister stage where every smile hid a dagger and every kiss concealed a threat. Her reign of terror was woven with dark secrets so deep that even the gods themselves might have recoiled in horror. Agrippina ruled not just with power, but with cruelty masked in velvet. It was said she had a private garden, hidden deep within the palace walls, where she kept jars of poison distilled from the deadliest herbs and the venom of exotic snakes brought from the far reaches of the empire. From this secret arsenal, she orchestrated deaths with chilling precision. Servants slipped into rooms with silent steps, offering wine or food laced with death to those who displeased her. Senators, generals, and even trusted advisors vanished in the night, their deaths blamed on illness or accident, but the truth was always whispered behind closed doors. Agrippina's hand had touched them. Her lovers, too, were caught in the snare of this deadly game. One favorite, the handsome freedman Narcissus, wielded influence through her and was rumored to have slept with both Agrippina and Nero. His rise was rapid and shadowed in scandal. His enemies found themselves ruined or dead, and his own end was as mysterious as his life. Some say Agrippina grew tired of him. Others whisper that Nero himself saw Narcissus as a rival for power and love. Then there was Pallas, a wealthy freedman who controlled the empire's finances. His pockets deep, his enemies many, Pallas was both protector and prisoner under Agrippina's watchful eye. He knew too much, and yet he stayed silent, for the cost of speaking was too high. There were nights when the palace echoed with screams of pain, rage, or pleasure none could say. Some courtiers were rumored to be imprisoned in hidden chambers, punished for secrets too dangerous to reveal. Women, kidnapped from noble families, were forced into Agrippina's personal service, their fate a cruel mystery known only to the empress and her closest servants. But perhaps the darkest shadow over Rome was the growing rift between mother and son. Nero, once the innocent boy wrapped in his mother's ambitions, was now a man shaped by paranoia and bloodlust. He grew jealous of Agrippina's influence, resenting the way she controlled his every move. Yet he feared her as much as he hated her. Their private battles became public scandals whispered in the streets. Nero took lovers openly, flaunting them as a challenge to his mother's authority. Some were aristocratic women, others actors or slaves, and all were pawns in a dangerous game. Agrippina responded with cruelty masked as maternal concern, confronting Nero in public, humiliating his lovers, and spreading vicious rumors about their loyalty. The palace was a battlefield and every smile hid a snarl. One such lover, a gladiator named Sporus, became the subject of one of the darkest scandals. Nero, obsessed with his mother's power and influence, is said to have forced Sporus to dress and live as a woman, a twisted reflection of his own conflicted desires. Agrippina, furious at this humiliation of her bloodline, plotted to turn Nero's passions against himself. Meanwhile, in the shadows, senators plotted too. Some conspired to free Rome from Agrippina's grip, meeting in secret with hopes of assassination or rebellion. But their plans were crushed before they began. The empress's spies were everywhere. Loyal slaves who listened behind walls, couriers who intercepted letters, and poisoners who waited patiently to silence any who betrayed her trust. One senator, Marcus Lepidus, was caught attempting to organize a conspiracy. His body was found in the Tiber, weighted down with stones, a chilling warning to others who dreamed of rebellion. As Rome's streets darkened with fear, Agrippina's public face grew colder. She appeared at religious ceremonies draped in mourning black, claiming to protect the empire from enemies seen and unseen. But her eyes betrayed her true nature, those of a woman who reveled in the destruction she sowed. She forced Nero to swear loyalty in public, binding him to her with oaths spoken under the gaze of gods and men. Yet behind closed doors, their relationship grew more fractured. Nero's violent outbursts became more frequent. His paranoia, fueled by his mother's manipulations, consumed him. Servants lived in constant fear of his wrath. When Nero ordered the execution of his own tutors or advisors, some whispered it was Agrippina's curse, her poison in his veins, twisting his mind into a mirror of her own darkness. The empire trembled beneath this reign of terror, a place where trust was a lie and loyalty a weapon. Every banquet was a dance on the edge of a knife, every smile a mask hiding the face of betrayal. And through it all, Agrippina stood at the center, the Spider Queen ruling her web of lies and death. Rome might have shuddered, but she was far from finished. The shadows were growing longer, and darker days awaited them all. As the years passed, the Palace of Rome transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, where the lines between loyalty and betrayal dissolved into a haze of fear and lust. Agrippina's grip tightened around Nero like a noose, but even her control was slipping as the young emperor spiraled deeper into darkness, fed by his own twisted desires and haunted by the poison of his mother's influence. Nero's appetites became insatiable. He indulged in pleasures both cruel and decadent, and the scandals of his reign spread like wildfire across the city. He hosted lavish parties where wine flowed like blood, and guests were drawn into games that blurred the line between ecstasy and torture. Courtesans, gladiators, and senators alike were caught in his web, some as willing participants, others as victims of his capricious cruelty. One of the most whispered about scandals involved Poppaea Sabina, a woman whose beauty and ambition rivaled Agrippina's own. Nero's obsession with Poppaea was notorious, yet their relationship was tangled in deceit and dark secrets. Rumors suggested that Poppaea had been involved in shadowy liaisons with powerful men at court, using her influence to manipulate Nero's decisions and secure her own rise. Some even claimed she had been a willing accomplice in plots against Agrippina herself, feeding the emperor lies that deepened the rift between mother and son. The palace echoed with silent screams when Nero's cruelty took a turn for the worse. Gladiators were forced to fight to the death for his amusement, and prisoners were executed in public spectacles designed to shock and terrify. Yet his darkest desires were reserved for those closest to him. It was said that Nero enjoyed watching the suffering of those who defied him. Noblemen dragged from their homes, tortured in secret chambers, and left to bleed in the silence of the night. Behind the emperor's throne, whispers grew louder of secret orgies, where Nero and his inner circle indulged in forbidden acts that defied all decency. These events were hidden from public view, but known to many within the palace walls. Courtesans trained in the arts of seduction and betrayal served as pawns in political games, their bodies weapons wielded by Nero and his advisors. Among these courtesans was a woman known only as Livia, whose charm was said to have brought even the most hardened men to their knees. She was rumored to have been involved in clandestine affairs with senators, generals, and even foreign dignitaries, all under Nero's watchful eye. Her influence was a dark force in the empire, and her secrets were kept in shadows deeper than any dungeon. Meanwhile, Agrippina's own circle was not immune to scandal. Her closest allies, once pillars of the regime, fell victim to the same poison they wielded. Trust became a commodity too expensive to afford. One by one, her confidants were exposed as traitors or lovers, some caught in compromising positions that destroyed their careers and lives. The empress's paranoia grew. No whisper was ignored, no secret left uninvestigated. She ordered spies to root out dissenters even within her own household, turning the palace into a fortress of suspicion and dread. The darkest scandal of all, however, was the growing suspicion that Agrippina herself was involved in affairs that defied not just morality, but nature. Some claimed she engaged in secretive liaisons with men far younger than herself, using their youth and strength to rejuvenate her fading power. Others whispered that she experimented with ancient and forbidden rites, seeking to bind the spirits of the dead to her will. These rumors, whether true or invented by fearful tongues, added to the terrifying mythos surrounding her. Yet the most dangerous aspect of Agrippina's rule was her unrelenting desire to control Nero's life and death. Their relationship was a twisted dance of love, hate, and betrayal. Nero's attempts to break free from her shadow were met with threats and blackmail. The empress wielded secrets about his lovers and allies as weapons, threatening ruin if he dared defy her. Their confrontations were violent and bitter, leaving scars that no one but they could see. The palace witnessed scenes of rage and despair, Nero smashing objects in fits of fury, Agrippina cold and unyielding, plotting her next move. Outside the palace walls, Rome itself was crumbling. The people suffered under heavy taxes to fund the emperor's extravagances and wars. Riots broke out, and dissatisfaction with Nero's rule grew. Yet none dared openly challenge the empress who pulled the strings, for her reach extended far beyond the throne. Rome was a city of secrets and lies, where power was bought with blood and loyalty was a fragile illusion. As Agrippina's enemies dwindled and her influence peaked, the question on everyone's lips was not if, but when the house of cards would collapse, and who would be left standing in the ruins. For now, the empress reigned supreme, a dark queen in a city that trembled beneath her shadow. But even the strongest shadows fade, and the night was growing ever darker. As the years wore on, the once glimmering image of Rome's imperial family became tainted with grime and shadows that no amount of light could wash away. The palace, once a symbol of grandeur and power, had transformed into a sinister labyrinth of secrets so vile that even the bravest souls dared not speak of them aloud. Agrippina the Younger, still the queen of this dark world, ruled not only with iron will, but through an insidious web of lust, betrayal, and corruption that spread like a cancer through every corner of the empire. It was whispered in hidden corners of the city that Agrippina's thirst for control was matched only by her appetite for forbidden pleasures, pleasures that shattered the sacred walls of Roman morality. Among the lesser-known but devastating scandals was the secret series of affairs that entwined the empress with figures far below her rank, men and women whose names have been erased by time, but whose stories lived in hushed fear. Young slaves, soldiers, and even senators' wives became unwilling participants in a shadow play of power, seduced or forced into the empress's dark desires. These liaisons were not mere acts of lust, but instruments of manipulation, carefully designed to ensnare and control, to create debts of silence that could never be repaid. One such affair involved a gladiator of unmatched strength and beauty, rumored to be Agrippina's favorite for a brief and mysterious time. His name has been lost to history, but the tale of his sudden disappearance is not. Found dead under suspicious circumstances in the training grounds, the official story claimed an accident, but the palace whispered a far darker truth. A jealous rival, or perhaps even Agrippina herself, had ordered his death when his loyalty wavered. More shocking were rumors of the empress's involvement with courtesans trained in the arts of seduction and deceit, women who became her eyes and ears throughout the empire. These women mingled with senators and generals alike, extracting secrets and wielding influence in places Agrippina's own presence could never reach. Some whispered that these courtesans engaged in rituals so forbidden and dark that they bordered on the occult, their bodies and wills bent not just to earthly desires but to commands from the supernatural. Such rumors may have been exaggerated, but they added to the aura of fear and fascination that clung to the empress's name. The palace itself was a prison where trust was the rarest currency. Even Agrippina's closest allies lived in constant dread of betrayal. Spies replaced friends, and every smile hid a knife poised to strike. The empress's most trusted confidants often found themselves accused of treason based on flimsy evidence or outright fabrications, their families disgraced, their lives destroyed without trial or mercy. One notable victim was a senator whose only crime was opposing the empress's growing power. He was accused of adultery with one of Agrippina's maids, a scandalous charge that led to his public humiliation and exile. The dark heart of the empire was not limited to affairs and politics. It spread into the very soul of Nero himself. The young emperor, once a boy overshadowed by his mother's will, had grown into a man as dangerous and twisted as the woman who birthed him. His own lusts knew no bounds, and the palace was filled with stories of his cruel indulgences. Nero's lovers ranged from aristocrats to slaves, and his pleasure was often a mask for his cruelty. It was said that he forced his lovers to fight in gladiatorial combat, turning his personal desires into a deadly spectacle. Some courtesans vanished mysteriously after falling out of favor, their fates sealed in silence. Among the most horrifying scandals was the story of Nero's infatuation with a young freedman named Sporus. After the death of his beloved Poppaea Sabina, Nero reportedly forced Sporus to dress and live as a woman, a twisted mimicry of the woman he lost. This cruel transformation was not only a display of Nero's madness, but also a dark reflection of the empire's decay under his rule. Agrippina's influence over Nero waned during these years, but her shadow still loomed large. The mother and son were locked in a battle of wills that tore at the fabric of the empire itself. Nero's paranoia grew. He saw enemies everywhere, some real, others conjured by his own fractured mind. The empress retaliated by spreading rumors of infidelity and treason among Nero's closest allies, sowing discord and isolating him further. Outside the palace walls, Rome's streets were filled with fear and despair. The burdens of heavy taxes and constant warfare fell upon the common people, who whispered of the corruption festering in the imperial court. Riots flared, and cries for justice echoed in the forums, but no voice was loud enough to reach the ears of those who ruled. As the empire teetered on the edge, Agrippina's darkest secret remained hidden beneath layers of deception and bloodshed. Her obsession with power was matched only by her capacity for cruelty. She was a mother who poisoned her own bloodline, a queen who ruled not with love, but with terror. The empire's heart beat in time with her ruthless ambition, and as the shadows lengthened, the dawn of a new, darker era approached. Betrayal, blood, and the empire's collapse. The Palace of Rome, once a beacon of imperial glory, had become a tomb of secrets and betrayal, its walls soaked in the tears and blood of those who dared to defy Agrippina and her son Nero. As the empire's heart beat weaker, the empress's cruelty grew sharper, her schemes more tangled, and the scandals darker than ever. Behind the silken curtains and gilded halls lay a reality far removed from the grandeur, one of lust twisted by power, alliances forged in lies, and bodies discarded like broken toys. Agrippina, the woman who had clawed her way to the throne, now faced the unraveling of everything she had built. Her court was a battlefield where even the closest allies were not safe from suspicion. Rumors swirled of secret affairs that shook the very foundation of the empire. It was whispered that Agrippina had engaged in forbidden liaisons with some of Rome's most powerful generals, men whose loyalty was bought with more than gold. These relationships were said to be dark bargains sealed in the dead of night, involving rituals and exchanges that blurred the lines between devotion and damnation. One such general, a man whose name was erased by history, but whose legacy was whispered in fearful tones, was rumored to have been poisoned by the empress after he grew too ambitious. His body was found in his villa, his death recorded as a natural illness. But the palace knew better. The web of deceit extended to the emperor himself. Nero's affairs became increasingly scandalous, dragging the empire into a vortex of decadence and despair. The young emperor was said to have turned his imperial bedchamber into a den of horrors, hosting orgies where the lines between pleasure and pain disappeared. Senators, gladiators, slaves, and courtesans were caught in his twisted games, their fates sealed by the caprice of a ruler lost to madness. Among these was a courtesan named Drusilla, whose beauty was matched only by the rumors surrounding her death. Some claimed Nero killed her in a jealous rage. Others whispered that Agrippina herself ordered the killing to send a message. The truth, like so many stories in the imperial court, was lost in the shadows. Yet perhaps the darkest secret was the growing rift between Agrippina and Nero, a rift that would soon lead to bloodshed. Their relationship, once built on mutual ambition, had decayed into hatred and fear. Nero, fueled by paranoia and his own brutal desires, began to see his mother not as protector, but as a threat. The empress, sensing her power slipping, retaliated with venomous plots to keep control. Poisoned letters, forged documents, and secret meetings in the dead of night became weapons in a war no one could openly declare. The city buzzed with rumors that Nero planned his mother's downfall, and that Agrippina was no less ruthless in her own schemes. The final act of this deadly drama was staged far from the public eye. In the privacy of their chambers, surrounded by loyal guards and spies, mother and son faced off in a battle of wills and weapons. Though history remembers the end as swift and brutal, the truth was a slow unraveling of trust and love, poisoned by years of manipulation and cruelty. Nero's orders came swiftly. Agents of the emperor, loyal not to blood but to power, surrounded Agrippina's home. Her pleas for mercy were met with silence. The empress, once the most powerful woman in Rome, was brought down by the very son she had molded. Yet even in death, her influence lingered, a dark shadow that haunted Nero in the empire he ruled. The fall of Agrippina marked the beginning of Rome's decline into chaos and despair. The empire, weakened by scandal and internal strife, could no longer hold together its vast territories. Rebels rose and enemies outside the walls pressed harder. Nero's reign, now unshackled from his mother's control, became a nightmare of excess and violence, sealing the fate of the empire itself. As the curtains closed on Agrippina's life, the city whispered her name with a mixture of fear and fascination. She was remembered not just as a mother or empress, but as a force of nature, a storm of ambition, cruelty, and dark desire that left a scar on Rome that would never heal. The empire's darkest hour was yet to come, but the tale of Agrippina the Younger stood as a grim testament to the price of power, the cost of lust, and the shadows that lie beneath even the brightest throne. The final chapter of Agrippina's story is not one of redemption or mercy, but a descent into madness and chaos that shattered not only her legacy, but the very foundation of Rome itself. In the shadowed halls where power had once whispered promises of glory, now echoed screams of betrayal, lust, and death. Agrippina's life ended in violence, but the darkness she unleashed consumed far more than just her own soul. It engulfed an empire already teetering on the edge of ruin. After the assassination ordered by Nero, Rome was left with a void, a throne haunted by the ghost of the empress, whose ambition had both built and destroyed the city's fragile peace. Nero's reign spiraled into madness, fueled by paranoia and depravity born from the toxic legacy of his mother's manipulation. The scandals that erupted during these final years were so sordid and savage that even the most hardened Romans whispered in horror. Nero's infamous decadence became a legend of cruelty. Orgies turned into grotesque ceremonies of blood and pain, where senators and slaves alike were subjected to humiliations beyond imagination. The emperor's lovers, both male and female, were pawns and victims, their fates sealed in whispered secrets and shadowed chambers. One of the darkest tales involved Nero's obsession with a young slave boy, whose name history never recorded. The boy was said to have been dressed in imperial robes, forced to mimic the emperor's every movement and word, a living symbol of Nero's fractured psyche. The boy's sudden disappearance led to rumors of murder, or worse, sacrifices to forgotten gods in the depths of the palace. Meanwhile, the court itself had become a den of vipers, where betrayal was currency and loyalty a lie. Senators schemed openly, assassinations were common, and the line between friend and foe vanished. One scandal that shook the empire to its core involved a secret cabal of senators who conspired with foreign enemies to seize power. Their plot was uncovered only through the brutal torture of a captured conspirator, a dark revelation that led to mass executions and purges, plunging Rome deeper into fear and chaos. Agrippina's earlier use of poison and intrigue had set a precedent that Nero eagerly followed. The emperor employed poisoners and assassins with reckless abandon, silencing rivals, family members, and even innocent bystanders suspected of disloyalty. His own advisors lived in terror, knowing that a whisper against the emperor could mean a sudden and agonizing death. The streets of Rome became a reflection of the court's madness. Riots and fires swept through the city, many believed to be instigated by Nero himself in fits of fury or as distractions from his failings. The Great Fire of Rome, which devastated much of the city, remains shrouded in suspicion, some accusing Nero of setting the blaze to rebuild the city in his own twisted image, others claiming it was divine punishment for the empire's sins. Amidst this chaos, the empire's enemies grew bolder. Barbarians at the borders pressed into Roman lands, sensing weakness and disorder. Governors ignored imperial orders, and provinces declared independence or fell into anarchy. The once mighty empire was crumbling, a shadow of its former self, all while Nero indulged in madness and excess. Yet perhaps the most harrowing secret was the legacy of cruelty passed down from mother to son. Agrippina's relentless ambition had created a monster, a ruler whose desire for power was matched only by his capacity for destruction. Nero's paranoia drove him to murder even those closest to him, including his own mother's former allies and friends. His reign became synonymous with fear, and his name cursed by those who survived him. The final years of Nero's life were marked by betrayal, rebellion, and despair. When the Senate finally declared him a public enemy, the emperor fled Rome, a hunted man haunted by ghosts, not least the specter of Agrippina, whose shadow had shaped his dark soul. Agrippina the Younger's story is a haunting reminder of the perilous price of power. She was a mother who manipulated her own son, a queen who poisoned her rivals and shaped an empire through fear and desire. Her reign left scars that bled long after her death, and her legacy is forever entwined with the fall of Rome itself. In the end, the empress who sought to rule from behind the throne unleashed a darkness so profound that it consumed everything. A darkness born of lust, betrayal, and an unquenchable thirst for power that shattered an empire and condemned her name to infamy. If you're captivated by the dark secrets and shocking scandals of ancient Rome, don't miss out on the full story. Dive deeper into the twisted lives of emperors and empresses who ruled with cruelty and desire. Subscribe now for more gripping tales from history's shadows, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chilling chapter. Join the conversation. Comment below with your thoughts or questions about Rome's most scandalous rulers.